Church bells, a ubiquitous component of the British soundscape. For hundreds of years, these massive instruments have rung out to communicate to communities up and down the country. Church services, weddings and funerals, all announced with this intriguing musical instrument. I want to learn more about them and piece together some of the story behind the sounds that we've heard emanating from churches up and down the country. Who rings them? Why do they do it? And how is it done? Join me as I find out more. This is the Holy Trinity Church in Hawley, Hampshire. Every week, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, a group of ringers come down to practice. They teach anyone, from complete beginners to folks who've rung bells for decades. I headed down there to talk to the group and find out what I'm looking for. While there, I spoke to many of the ringers and met Dorothy, who's been ringing throughout her entire life. She invited me round to learn more, and we chatted about her life and how her education and career path led her through coincidence into bell ringing.
My parents said and signed that I would stay at school until I was 16. We got to school certificate, so I was looking for a job. And we didn't have careers advisors, and I came across something called a civil service student apprenticeship scheme, which sounded interesting because I was doing science subjects. And so I had a go at that, and we did 3 days. I was growing up in Leicester at that point, and I went to Nottingham for 3 days to sit written exams. And eventually there was a book published and sent to all the people who had taken the exams to show you which order you were getting through them in. And when I looked at it, I was quite surprised at that point because I was at an all-girls school and discovered that it was nearly all boys. One girl was above me, somewhere in this mix of about 200 to 300 names. I was second and another girl was third, a bit further down. So following on from that, I was offered an interview in Leeds, and they told me that I'd got my O-level results by then. You either passed or failed, you didn't get grades. And they said, well, you might be interested if you're going to take A-levels to carry on, and you could sort out a job as a scientific assistant or an assistant experimental officer rather than doing student apprenticeship. So I stayed at school another 2 years, did A-levels, got good results, was offered an interview in London, which my train fare was paid for, which was wonderful. So I left school at the beginning of August that year, 1956, and got a job. Well, I'd intended to get a job in Leicester, and I was offered a place and I was due to start. The day I was due to start, I was offered an interview at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, as it was then known, in Farnborough, in Hampshire. And it was air show week. And air shows were very exciting because we were just getting supersonic aircraft flying. It was the days of fighters going supersonic, crashing, making loud noises, everything you can think of. I ditched a job in Leicester and went for the interview in the hopes that I would pass it. Fortunately I did, and I was offered a job at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in the aerodynamics department. So I moved into the hostel that belonged to the RAE. The girl who had come first had taken up the apprenticeship and was there already. The girl who came third left school at 16 after O-levels, didn't do A-levels, been offered a job as a scientific assistant, lived reasonably locally but went home only for weekends and was also in the hostel. We didn't have television. Each block in the hostel was an old site that had been used as a prisoner of war camp, and we lived in what were called spiders, which were rows of wooden huts. And really, we'd nothing else much to do in the evenings. So the girl who came third and lived locally was actually a bell ringer at that point, and our nearest church didn't actually have a team of bell ringers. So she was looking for people to try and form a team, and several of us were sitting around, not very busy. We didn't have exams to do. It was great life in its way, but it could be a little bit tedious. So we signed up to try this bell ringing lark. The vicar was also a bell ringer and was keen to get the bells ringing again. There had been a team after the end of the war, because they weren't used during the war at all, except for possibly an alarm if need be, if we were invaded. It was a lovely time because rationing had literally just finished. We were all footloose and fancy free at that point, and we started bell ringing. We had Eileen, who is still my friend, who had been ringing since she was 12 and was a very good ringer. We had a chap called George, who I'm still in contact with, who had rung in the West Country and could handle a bell. And we set to lift ourselves up literally by our bootstraps to make this little team of bell ringers, which we got going. And eventually we got a not terribly high level of ringing, but we used to go somewhere basically nearly every weeknight to other churches, so we came on quite rapidly. And ever since then, it's been one of my hobbies all the way through my life.
The community around ringing is core to the way the groups operate. But while groups are often close-knit, they're friendly to beginners.
Basically, any church that rings bells on a practice night will welcome you, whatever stage of ringing you're at, and will adapt to do something so that you can ring a bell. So you can start off on something that you call tower grabbing, nothing to do with the religious end at all, and you accumulate the towers that you've rung at. Churches in any given area ring on a different evening of the week for practice. They all try to ring for Sunday service because that's the main aim, but you do it for enjoyment as well, and it is known as the exercise, which I think you'll be able to talk about yourself in due course because you have had a pull on the rope.
You always keep your hands on.
Over the course of learning about bells, I did attend a few ringing nights to learn the basics. I started off with only one part of the motion, called the backstroke. Over the weeks, I built up what I was doing with guidance from Jim and Richard, and whilst I haven't gained much confidence, I think I have the hang of the very basics.
Down. And let go.
Don't look up. The dead flies will come down and get you.
Yeah, don't look up.
And I can confirm Dorothy's not wrong. It's good exercise. Those things are not light. In fact, the heaviest bell, which is called a tenor at Hawley, weighs a whopping 550 kilograms. So moving something so heavy needs quite a complicated mechanism to make it work.
It really is almost an English art. Goes way back to the 1500s or so. Originally, bells weren't hung on a wheel. So the sort of bell ringing we do now, a bell is hung on a full wheel, goes from vertically upright to vertically upright again, making a clang about 2/3 of its way round the circle. They vary enormously in weight and they vary enormously in quantity.
So what happens, the rope, the cell is down there, the rope comes up over the pulley underneath the bell to where it's tied on. And when the bell rings, it goes round to the backstroke, and now the rope is going all the way over the wheel to where it's fixed on there. This is the frame, that is the headstock, these are the bearings. Then the parts of the bell, you have the waist, the sound bow where the clapper hits, and the lip, which is the edge of the bell. And underneath the bell, you have a stay. The stay is made of ash, which is a wood which has got the properties that it'll be slightly springy, but it will snap if it's overloaded. It's there to allow you to stop A lot of churches in Devon, they used to ring what they called Devon call changes, which is fast ringing. And quite often they didn't bother to have stays on their bells, so they never actually put them into the upright position. So one of their touches on the bells, they would start with the bells down, they would ring them up about 3/4 of the way up. They would have some call changes where you tell ringers to ring over different bells, and then they would let the bells down, all in rounds.
Nowadays, thanks to modern tech, there's many tools to help people learn how to ring. This device uses sensors in the bell tower to send a signal to a computer to trigger a digital bell sound. Not only does it allow ringers to practice without disturbing the neighbourhood, it also allows a single ringer to practice their timing without a group by giving a score for their timing.
That's a green. Well, yellow and green.
Computer software like this wouldn't have existed when Dorothy was starting to ring, but the tech she was working with at RAE was cutting edge for the time.
Been in computing since I went to the RAE. At that point, it was all mainframe. It had 1000K of memory. Everything else you had to take in and out of the storage. And it used a language called reverse binary, which was quite specific to that machine. So the program looked like a series of switches on one side of the sheet and a string of binary numbers on the other side connected to a switch. And we used it to deal with data from wind tunnel tests in the particular situation I was in. And at that point, my boss, immediate boss, was in charge of doing wind tunnel tests in an 8-inch supersonic tunnel on the shape of an aircraft that at that point was a supersonic air transport and came to be known as Concorde. So eventually, after 4 years of work and tests and looking at the results and plotting many graphs and doing many calculations, a dot was put in the middle and the shape, the flat shape of Concorde came out of it.
So, I know about how they work, and Dorothy's told me some of the incredible details about her life. But what do you have to do to actually become a bell ringer? And how are the ringers organised?
First of all, you have to be able to learn how to handle it. You don't just pull on a rope and then go up in the air. That is highly dangerous and strongly objected to. Eventually, when you know how to ring it, you can be nominated to join the guild. The whole of bell ringing all over the world is run by a guild. Ring for service with the vicar's permission, usually because he wants you to anyway. If requested, you ring for weddings, ring for funerals, and ring on special occasions, again with the vicar's permission to do it always. So it is under the church from that point of view. But there is a guild of bell ringers. There is a magazine published on a weekly basis called Ringing World, which holds all sorts of general information, and in particular the events of things called peals and quarter peals that different churches have rung. And there are some regulations for it because it's a big noise. If you live in a city, you probably have to have louvers fitted so you can close them when you're practicing. And every church has its designated practice night with an hour and a half worth of practice. It's usually in an evening, usually about 7:30 to 9 o'clock. Probably not much later than that because of the children going to bed locally. Try not to annoy the residents. It stays with you all your life. Once you know how to handle a bell, you can handle a bell. It's very much like learning to ride a bike. First of all, you have to learn how to ride it, and then you can discover where you can take it to.
After learning all about the bells and how they're rung, and giving it a go myself, I've gained so much insight into the skill that goes into it all. And now, hopefully, you too will have a better understanding of who's working hard when you hear the bells chime.